Welcome to the panel titled ReconciliACTION, Global Citizenship Education within the UNESCO Schools Network and Beyond. The idea behind this panel was really to highlight the concept of global citizenship education and really exploring what does that look like in action within a school context, within a classroom. And then within the Canadian context, we also really wanted to explore the concept of reconciliation between Indigenous, non-Indigenous peoples, and how does that also intersect with this theme of global citizenship education. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Isabelle Lavarche-Yasson, and I am the Education Program Officer for the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. We are a partner and collaborator for this symposium with our UNESCO Chair in Democracy, Citizenship, and Transformative Education. So we're very happy and pleased to be part of the program and to be supporting this whole week event. Global citizenship education is actually a big goal of UNESCO. So UNESCO is the UN agency responsible for monitoring, evaluating, and coordinating SDG 4, which is the Sustainable Development Goal on quality and inclusive education for all. For those that are really into the Agenda 2030 and know all the SDGs, you'll know that there's actually an indicator 4.7, which is actually on global citizenship education and sustainable development. And Canada has actually been quite interested in this topic about how do we measure that? What does that look like? How do we make sure that we're actually ensuring students to have the global competencies to think about global citizenship within their local context, their national context, and globally. And we're seeing more and more that we can't separate one from the other. We are obviously grounded physically in land, and we are also interconnected on Mother Earth and on this planet. I'd like to acknowledge that I am based in Ottawa, the capital of Canada, on unceded Algonquin territory, and that I get to walk this land every day with my kids, and that I'm very grateful to have access to it. And we have a sunny, warm day here in Ottawa. So I'd like to, we have three excellent panelists that will be joining us with really diverse perspectives. I'm so excited for you to hear what they have to say on this topic. But just to start us off in a little more interactive way, I want to show you just a short video on the UNESCO Schools Network. The UNESCO Schools Network is actually one of the largest schools network globally. It has over 11,500 schools. In Canada, we're over 110 schools, and we really use it as a vehicle to pilot initiatives, projects linked to global citizenship education, sustainable development, and basically that target 4.7. So I want to show you some students, since we're talking about education first and foremost. So hopefully, without a hitch, I will share my screen and share with you the video.
In order to understand the whole talking stick, we have to hear everybody's perspective. So we're going to listen respectfully to each other's answers.
I thought there was a whole process. I didn't know they basically just took them away from their parents.
The fact that it's UNESCO school means that we're acknowledging and we're stating as part of our school priorities that we also care about global citizenship. We care about sustainable development. We care about our kids learning about where can I fit into this, where can I connect to this, where do I become part of the movements that are out there that could make a change, where do I see a movement that needs to be created.
We're just trying to be more of a healthy environment, and we're trying to make ways to help. So we're doing fun challenges every month that will inspire kids to join in.
Being a CC UNESCO school literally is the coolest thing ever. Every teacher that teaches at our school would say it frames everything. It guides us through our curriculum, it guides us through our principles.
Ça nous amène à l'ouverture sur le monde, à l'ouverture sur l'autre, et c'est comme ça qu'on va pouvoir créer la paix à travers le monde.
grâce à tout ce qu'on a appris, ça nous a fait réaliser que dans le monde, il y a des gens qui n'ont pas la chance, la même chance qu'on a. Puis on était comme, ben, il faut qu'on fasse quelque chose pour changer ça.
The students will take what they learn here, share it with their community, share it with their families, share it with the groups that they work with. This message of peace and transforming the world through peace activism is my hope.
L'avantage de rejoindre le réseau des écoles UNESCO associées, c'est vraiment d'être en relation avec d'autres écoles dans le monde, de savoir qu'est-ce qui se fait, de savoir qu'on est tous sur la même planète, qu'on est des citoyens planétaires.
Notre rôle en tant qu'éducateur et en tant qu'organisation aussi, c'est de pouvoir amener ces jeunes à préparer un meilleur futur pour eux et pour les futures générations.
This whole thing matters because it's our Earth that's at risk, and the animals and the plants and us, we're all being affected by it, so we actually have to do something.
Je trouvais ça vraiment le fun. Ça nous a permis de découvrir vraiment qu'est-ce qui se passait, de voir vraiment qu'est-ce qui se passe en réalité dans le fond. Puis tout le monde est différent, puis je pense que les accepter comme ils sont parce qu'ils ont toutes une histoire à raconter.
We're desensitized to the suffering of other people because we see it, we're confronted with it all the time. So there's different issues, but I think that there's hope.
To be a part of this network, I feel like it's to be a part of a larger community that recognizes that we are all global citizens and that we should work towards doing things not only locally but also globally across the nation, across the globe.
So were you able to hear the sound? Great. It's always good to know after. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of the UNESCO Schools Network, just to ground it into, and I hear my video still going, so I'm just going to close it. Sorry, interruption. So just to frame this conversation about global citizenship, what does that look like for teachers, for educators, how they bring that into the classroom, but also in the larger context in Canada with reconciliation, and with also our process of giving a voice to young folks and students in the classroom and advocating on their behalf in terms of youth engagement and youth advocacy. So as I said previously, now I'd love to introduce our three panelists, which will be offering some great perspectives on this. So my first panelist that I will be introducing is Lynette Schultz. I believe she was also previously in another panel this week, so if you haven't had a chance to hear her already, she's has an amazing perspective to offer. She's a professor and the director of the Center for Global Citizenship Education and Research at the University of Alberta. I really love and admire her work, which focuses really on global issues and processes and how that impacts the well-being of people and other species on the planet. So she has actually written a great piece for us at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO on what global citizenship education looks like from an ethical framework for the UNESCO Schools Network. She's done research impact evaluation for us in the past as well. She's very well versed in really connecting her research to youth and to classrooms and teachers and educators. Secondly, we'll be hearing from Charlene Bearhead. She's a recent new partner for us with the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, and so happy to officially be launching today on our website an Idea Lab publication on reconciliation and global citizenship education. Aside from writing and contributing with us, she is the director of reconciliation at the Royal Canadian Geographical Society and Education, and she's also been very active in the context of TRC national events and the Reconciliation Commission of Canada. So thanks for being with us. Ellis, Charlene. And last but not least, I'm very excited to have Jeremiah Ellis with us today. He is a member of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO's Youth Network. But aside from that, he's also a founder of an online campaign against Islamophobia, the World Mosaic Project. He was the Canadian representative at the last UNESCO Youth Forum, and so much more that he's been doing in his community. So thanks for joining us, Jeremiah. So my first question to all the panelists to launch this discussion is, I just want you to tell us a bit about yourself and your experience with global citizenship education as a learner and or educator. So what does this really mean for you as we're moving into the 21st century and the future of education? So I'll let Lynette start us off.
Hi everyone. So as you said, Isabel, I work at the University of Alberta, and for the past 20 years, actually, I have been studying global citizenship education, and really mapping how that idea has moved around in different ways. You know, it is a contested concept. But what I tend to think of global citizenship as a threshold concept in education, so that it's the kind of idea that once you understand and kind of read the world from a global perspective, or planetary perspective, it's a threshold concept in that you can't unsee it. You can't go back to see the world in a way the way you had previously. And so I just finished another study mapping global citizenship education in Europe and North America that's being launched next week, with lots of really current and interesting data on how global citizenship is being taken up. So watch for that too.
Thanks, Lynette. Nice and sweet. Charlene, do you want to share your experience linked with global citizenship education, where you're coming from as an educator, learner, etc.?
I watched it, Opabin Shawia in McGevy. I just want to say good morning. I'm really happy to be joining you from my home here in Treaty 6 territory, in what is most commonly referred to now as Central Alberta. This, where I live, is the shared Nakota, Cree, Dene territory, as well as Métis homeland. But also Edmonton is now the largest urban Inuit community outside of Inuit Nunanat. So that's something that's really surprising to many people. People think it's Ottawa, maybe Winnipeg, Montreal, but it's actually Edmonton. And I'm just about an hour and a half outside of the city. And so I would say, first and foremost, the reason that, you know, this is all so important to me, although I've done this work before I was in these roles, but as a mother and a grandmother, and I am a mother and a grandmother of many, my children are all Indigenous, my grandchildren are all Indigenous, my community, you know, is Indigenous, both here locally at home in our family and community, but also I would say nationally and internationally, because there are so many connections between the way we do things here, the way our Maori whānau do things, the way, you know, there's a real connection, because that's the connection to the earth. And so it's really exciting. For me, I only just came to learn more and more about global citizenship education. I'm still a real learner in this area, but it's because of a really dear friend of mine, Linda Connor, who is an amazing human being. That I know all of you get to work with on many occasions. And so, as you indicated, I was really involved with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, have been an educator, principal, superintendent, education director, both on and off reserve in Alberta and Manitoba for 30 some years. I'm old. And so it was when I came to know a little bit more about global citizenship education, I'm like, oh, okay. It's really kind of what we're doing, you know, from a different angle, sort of, I guess, or a different perspective. And so I was the education coordinator for education events at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Then at the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, established the education sort of unit there. Was the for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. It was a small commission. I was the education team there, working with the research team. And then now again at Canadian Geographic and advisory for National Film Board around Indigenous education. And so for me, that journey of Linda Connor reaching out to me at the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation saying, we have this group of global citizenship education, educators, and we've got this network of, UNESCO schools in Canada, and we want them to come and we want you to present to them and we want your team to share with them about what's happening out of the TRC. So because when Linda says something, I know it's amazing. And Estelle was involved. And so I'm like, hey, this is something we have to do. And so that was fantastic. I've actually had, Lynette and I have had sort of touch points here and there with different things through TRC events. We both do work with Cindy Blackstock on some, youth advocacy and children as change makers. And then I was really honored to be invited to actually speak on the plenary opening panel in Seoul in 2019. You know how COVID makes everything sort of blur together? I actually had to think about that last night. I think we were in Seoul in 2019 when we could actually come together as human beings face to face in the same space. And it was interesting that, and so all of you, I would say, know more about the people, or you have a longer connection to the people who were there in that group than I do. And it was really interesting to me, but not surprising, that the people there from all over the world were shocked, first of all, that there was a place for Canada on that panel, because isn't Canada this mecca of human rights where everyone's treated equally and beautifully and well, and it's all good? And so I just want to be clear that the truth, there's a reason that there's truth in truth and reconciliation, because without truth, there is no reconciliation. And when I feel like when we speak these truths in this work, whether we're coming at it from, truth and reconciliation lens or a global citizenship education lens, we're really coming to the same place, I would say. And we have those real shared goals that we'll talk about later on in this panel. But it's not to say Canada's a horrible place and it's horrible, and it's to say, wouldn't we be better off to earn the reputation that we have globally by being recognized as a nation, as a country, as nations coming together that have the moral courage, as Cindy would call it, to actually confront our collective history, to be honest about that, and to be recognized as the people who have the courage to face that, to own that, and to do something different. So that's kind of the way I see that sort of intersection in my work. So that Ishnish Pinamat.
Thank you, Charlene. That was a great, actually, history relations of how we intervene. And it's true that actually how you got initially connected with us is through that panel in South Korea, and exploring around the world different realities of what reconciliation looks like, and that you can't address it really without acknowledging your history and your truth. And it can be really challenging, right? To address that. And particularly with many countries with colonial histories. So thank you. Now to you, Jeremiah. What does global citizenship education mean to you? Tell us a bit about yourself, and also how you've learned through this as a learner or educator.
Well, yeah, it's really exciting to be here today. I'm also coming from Treaty 6 territory, in what is now known as Edmonton, Alberta today. So it's nice to connect with you, Charlene, and Lynette as well. But yeah, like my, journey, I've really been influenced a lot by the teachers and professors in my life. I remember my English teacher in high school really kind of instilled a idea of like social justice in the students, and like using like the stories we were learning in like English class and connecting that to a sense of like service and like leading change in the world. And like those lessons, like I still like carry with me in that like mentorship. It really set me on a path, and I think like that's really the power that like education and teachers specifically have, and those ripples I think can carry for a really long time. And I guess in university, like I'm at the University of Alberta, I was a political science student, and sometimes I did have actually trouble in the classroom, and I sometimes felt like there was a bit of an alienation, and that is like part of university because I think it is so big. But it was actually like later on in my degree, I started taking like theology classes at the University of Alberta through St. Joseph's College and St. Stephen's College. And what was interesting was like, it was like a smaller learning setting, but like there was more of like a relationship between students and professor, or between students and students. And I think with going back to like my like English teacher, like that was really important, that like personal relationship alongside the learning. And like in the theology classes, like we also emphasize like a sense of like communion, or like interconnectedness, or like interbeing in the classroom. And the idea that you're in relationship, not competition with your peers. And the idea that you're like co-creating a learning community together. And like that also like shaped how we thought about how we like engage with the rest of the world. Like we're also in connection with each other, in communion with each other, but then we're also connected to like nature, to the greater world, and we should be like in service. So that inspired me to do like a master's in theological studies at St. Stephen's College now, which I'm really looking forward to. But like it's also, I guess why I've been really drawn to like global citizenship education too. Just the idea of like thinking local, but acting global, living together, but like being in connection with each other, but also like trying to act in service with the bigger picture too.
Thank you, Jeremiah. That's such a great perspective. I love the comment about what we don't really think about traditionally is the importance of spirituality and of beyond, of when we're talking about global citizenship education and the connectedness of other human beings with each other, of the place that we're at, like that whole aspect. And I also loved your contribution also about talking about the impacts of teachers that they've had in your life, because how it starts at a very young age. So that's why we're really trying to ground this, also bringing that the context of UNESCO schools, which tend to be, you know, from kindergarten to grade 12, and obviously go beyond in higher education, but starting to infuse those concepts of global citizenship education, of caring for others, of reconciliation, are so important to start at a young age. So now I have a few specific questions to each panelist, and I'll start with Lynette. So Lynette has done a lot of work with our UNESCO Schools Network, and I would say also your work is really grounded in really participatory action research. I don't know if you use that term, but I know that you've always included teachers, educators, and students in a lot of your research, even being based at a university. So I always respect that. So based on your experience working with high school students, with whatnot, what does that experience, how has that helped you better understand global citizenship education, the importance of bringing it at a younger age, and what can that look like in action that you've seen it, how you demonstrate, how you you teach and you do your research, but then influence others to do the same? Oh, and you're on mute. Typical online.
That's happened once in a session, right? So global citizenship to me is a really, I mean, it's fascinating to me that it can be taken off into quite a few different ways. But when I work with students, particularly high school students, elementary school students, and university students, there are some very important global citizenship becomes an answer, right, to so many questions that students bring to their learning. And so I've had the privilege of organizing and participating in several global classrooms that include mostly UNESCO associated schools, but also other schools around the world. So about once a year or every second year, we organize a classroom to explore a global issue that brings together students from many different countries. And so from those experiences, as well as all the fabulous teachers I've worked with, I've come to understand that really the work, the profound work of global citizenship really is best when schools take it on as a whole school. It becomes an ethical framework for what goes on in the schools. And in the report, the reflection paper that I wrote for CC UNESCO, I talked about the idea of conviviality as that ethical framework, because it draws together the key ideas around living together on the planet. And using the term conviviality, right? It's an expression of the human capacity to relate to the world, but also to be impacted with the world. And one of the things I see with global citizenship, and as we really deepen it through the ideas of reconciliation in the work in Canada, is that we need to reconcile our relations with nature, with the planet, in order to reconcile our human relations. And really, that is conviviality and global citizenship brought together. And so if we look at global citizenship and reconciliation together, I think conviviality is how we can really understand that. And so, and what I see from, I'm just going to read a little quote from a global classroom that took up the question of global citizenship. So this was involved about 1,000 high school students. I think this one was about 22 different countries. And we worked for most of a year together to talk about global citizenship in a very deep way. And this is what they said, and I'll just read a quote from them. They said, global citizenship will not be defined by one set of actions. It's an ongoing conversation about multiple ways to enable equity around the world. Because of different positions in society, people will experience global citizenship differently and will have different sets of responsibilities. There are, however, some pillars that we feel hold up global citizenship as a moving and dynamic concept that enables the possibilities for equity. These pillars are what can make global citizenship accessible to everyone: deep listening, self-reflexivity, and engaged action within a global community. So this was from high school students. So I would say what fabulous leadership that has come from youth who are understanding and reading the world in a deep kind of way. So I would encourage people to read that report and see there's, what comes out of that are shifts in curriculum, shifts in pedagogies, shifts in policies, but overall deeply changed relations in those classrooms, within communities, within the wider network that is connected through those activities.
Thanks for sharing that quote. That was really powerful. And I love how you highlighted that came from high school students, which shows really the importance of having these conversations at a really critical, like at a younger age, and challenging students to really reflect deeply on this. That was really beautiful. And yeah, I love the equity piece, and also how you were talking about it's a process, right? It's not just the what, but the how. And And UNESCO has worked a lot on that concept of whole schools approach. So I think we're still reflecting on thinking beyond the classroom, which a current pandemic world we're actually really in, right? We no longer have the physical classrooms. So I think it's expanding our mind to think about that from a community sense. So now I have a question for Charlene, and actually it's a good segue when you were talking about reconciliation too in Coconut. So we're very excited that Charlene helped us agree to publish with us an Idea Lab, a reflection paper on reconciliation and global citizenship education. And there's some great lessons learned in that article. But Charlene, I just want you to speak from the heart from your experience and what you've learned so far from what does that mean, reconciliation in the context of global citizenship education.
Shanice, thank you, Isabel. So I have to be honest that when I was asked to speak on the panel in Seoul, I really sort of struggled with how can we be talking about global, and I say we as in our own country, in the situation that we're in, how can we be talking about that? I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, you know, when my kids were growing up, and something would happen, or they did something that they shouldn't have, and you know, they would say, but he did this, or but she did that, and I would say, okay, but what did you do? We're not talking about what did he do, what did she do, what did you do? Because that's the thing that we can do something about. And I really felt the same way about that. You know, it was my first global citizenship education, like full on, you know, international conference. And I thought, no, I feel like almost like, you know, before going into, I feel like a little bit of a hypocrite if I'm talking about that, because I feel like we have a long ways to go at home, taking a look at, but what about us? What have we done? Who are we really? And so that in and of itself was really interesting. And I absolutely see the connections. You know, I mean, when we talk about young people, I think high school is too late to start. I mean, we always start wherever we can. But I know during the time of the TRC, you know, people would say, oh my gosh, you can't talk about residential schools to 5-year-olds, to 6-year-olds. And first of all, the children are always the best, absolutely the most courageous agents of change, always. You know, grade 4, 5, 6 is just like, to me, the epitome of the place to start, because the kids there are always really all about what's fair and what's right. You know, so my response around that with residential schools is actually 5-year-olds understand, you know, that it's not okay to be separated from your family. And they're the ones who teach us that in and of itself was horrendous, never mind all of the things that happened beyond that. But the other thing is, and my response sort of, you know, because I think it's important for us to reflect, is I don't think 5-year-olds are too young to learn, whether it's about residential schools, about global, you know, to learn about what's happening in the world, who we really are as a country, where we need to go, who we are as one another, with one another as Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. But 5-year-olds were way too young to be subjected to it. And they were. Thousands and thousands and thousands of little ones were subjected to this thing that we now think, you know, some people think that they can't even learn about. They absolutely grasp the concept. So I get that connection in a big way. The whole concept about, you know, being committed to and focusing on human rights, absolute alignment there. And we really worked hard. When I say we, it's not about me. There's this whole network of educators across the country that have really done this work together and continue to build out that network. And it wasn't bad choices. People like to talk about, when we talk about Canada, you know, we struggle a little sometimes with just being honest about, no, it was us, it's us. And so people would say, you know, there were some really bad choices. They weren't bad choices. They were human rights violations is what they were and what they continue to be. And so to me, that's really important. And let's use the language that's accurate. And we make that connection, you know, and there's human rights violations that are happening all over the world, but make no mistake, right here at home too, right here at home. I really, you know, the whole concept of sustainability and sustainable development, and I think that's where one of the things where I really connect that is, that if we look at what we're doing here and what's happening here, and all we need to do is look at the interference of the transmission of knowledge from Indigenous people to non-Indigenous people over a period of time since contact. And is that people kind of can wrap their heads around the fact that, you know, colonization, residential schools, that the whole history of colonization, that colonial process in this country, is about the interference of transmission of knowledge from one generation to another in Indigenous families. But what people sometimes miss is a huge loss in this country is the transmission of knowledge from Indigenous people to non-Indigenous people. And that Indigenous people, that First Nations, that Inuit were ready and willing and were sharing with non-Indigenous people at contact and beyond, because otherwise we'd all be dead. We still wouldn't be here. It was because of Indigenous people, but also the planet. And if we look at that interference of the transmission of the knowledge about how to care for the Arctic and how to care for the land. And so we know that Inuit have been advocating for, and, you know, and lobbying for protection of the environment in the Arctic, and because they knew the impact, and they know the impact globally. And still there is this arrogance, you know, in colonial states about, no, we know best. And so I feel like that's a really important connection. But it was actually interesting during the panel, because on the panel that I was speaking on, we had a representative from South Korea, one from Colombia, one from South Africa, one from Rwanda. And so we had, and of course, all the other speakers were also in the room. And so there was a question to me, because it was a bit off-putting for people that there was this whole thing about Canada. And it was actually a participant from Japan that said, you know, raised the question that we hear all the time at home. But why should I be responsible for this? Why do I need to take responsibility? Because I didn't do this. It was the people who came before me. And he was talking about in his own country. And my response to him was, but you benefit from what happened every day. I benefit from what happened every day. People in this country, treaties have two sides. It's not only First Nations that have treaty rights. We have treaty rights that are so well intact, we don't even need to know that we have them. So I feel like that connection is really, really strong. And it made me realize in that moment that there are messages also that if we talk about and model that, taking responsibility for our own history, our own reality, we can share those and we can understand those things about, you know, how those impacts come together globally in those actions. But I also see a real value, we know just in Canada alone, that when we let our students and have our students connect with one another and know that they're part of something bigger, and then through global citizenship education, recognizing that we really are all in this together. And I loved the quote, the teacher that spoke in the video that you showed, Isabel, where she said, in our school, it frames everything we do. And it needs to frame everything we do, because this is not a topic in social studies that we check off. This is who we are with one another, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, different cultures, different groups, that all bring valuable knowledge to this conversation. And so to me, you know, that was an education for me, that there really is a connection. But I think that the way we contribute globally is to make sure that we are being honorable, equitable, sustainable, you know, respectful citizens in our own larger community. Shanish.
Thanks, Charlene. That really that really spoke to my heart when you were talking earlier about how to start really young, and even 5-year-old. I have a 5-year-old, and I definitely agree that he can already understand concepts of inclusion, equity, right and wrong, yeah, all of those concepts. And even when you were speaking at the end about the impact of how we benefit. I was thinking about that as well, about how, you know, it's like the government, the current newly elected government will pass the buck to previous governments for their wrongdoings. But, you know, they hold the power now, just like we citizens hold the power now. So it's true to pass the buck to previous generations is not fair either. So thank you for that powerful message. Now to Jeremiah, my last targeted question to you. Being, you know, young yourself, but still student also with that frame of mind, can you talk a little bit about the link between global citizenship education, youth engagement, and youth advocacy, and really the importance of creating space for students and learners to have a voice within the process? And I know you're process oriented as well, so I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you. I guess with like youth activism and like drawing on that perspective, it makes me think of the idea of like co-creating with youth or for youth by youth, because I think often like we might have like a set plan, it might be like well-intentioned, but then we might just be like speaking on behalf of like young people or like addressing their needs from our own perspective rather than like getting their like direct experiences. And I think like drawing on like lived experiences of youth in the process of like even like creating educational materials or how the classroom space is going to work is also vital. But in terms of like a process that I really appreciate was one where I was part of a team with it was a project funded by the European Union, and apathy is boring, but it was called Amplify Youth Voices. And what the project emphasized was the idea of like youth co-creating both the space and the project together, while like the organizations that were funding it like kind of took a step back. And this really emphasized like the youth, we co-created the community together based on what we wanted, the idea of like creating a non-hierarchical space, a non-competitive space, and then like kind of actively trying to like decolonize the space together. And I think what was key like in this process was like thinking about like in terms of like identity, like who are you coming into the space? What legacies are you carrying with you? What positions of privilege and power are you bringing into this space? Because I think when we want to actually like build a community together, if we want to have like conversations, build relationships, it's important to understand where each person in that space is coming from. And I think like that, emphasizing these things really helped, I think, build the project, because first, like people felt like they could, like it was a brave space. So like you could feel that your contributions were valued, that you were like safe to be who you are in the space. But then also I think the idea of understanding that like each person in the space has like different gifts, like they can contribute to that community or to the space. And what this like, I guess, process led to was, like I have it here, it was this zine, but it was a collection of like artwork, resources, and reflections from Indigenous artists, as well as BIPOC artists in Edmonton. And like it was really much a reflection of like the unique gifts on the team. Because for example, like there was one part of the zine where it was like someone who was like skilled at like meme making was able to contribute to the zine using their like talent with like memes. And it was like such a specific thing that like a young person is passionate about, like that was in turn into something useful in a social justice sense, because their like specific gifts, their identity was like valued and heard in that space. So then it became a very unique and like exciting contributing factor in the project. And I think like tying that back to like my experiences with like the idea of like co-creating a classroom. I think I had a professor at St. Stephen's College named Norbert Krumans, and he really emphasized that like the greatest resource in a classroom is the students that come into the classroom. And I think when we're able to like kind of break down the hierarchies, emphasize relationships and build a community before anything else, where people can just like be themselves, know that like their unique gifts are like valued. I think we create a learning space where it's not just about like the resources that are presented, but it's actually the voices in the classroom that are contributing to all the learning that's going on. And I think, yeah, just really emphasize that like there's so much potential just by like looking at the learners, the people in the space, and like tapping into that and like doing the work, I guess, to create a space, like a safe and braver space where that potential can be like tapped into.
Thank you. I loved those different, like, and really trying to highlight the how of like the youth activism, of different ways to express yourself, of being creative with seeing what individuals have to contribute and how they can co-create that learning space in that classroom you were saying is such a really interesting process. Now we're going into the Q&A, and I'm so happy we already have a hand raised up. Beverly, who's actually been active in the chats, thank you so much for participating. And I see that you are actually looking at seeing how to implement the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations at Lakehead University. So I'd love to give you a chance to introduce yourself and just ask your question to all our one panelist, and we'll see how we can interact in the next bit.
Okay. Bonjour, Nindwe Magananduk. Nimki Nagwagan Tishnakas, Mekdodem, Nimki Waju Dunjba. My name is Beverly Bannon. I'm from Fort William First Nation, and I'm from the Beaver Clan. I'm trying to, I'm on Senate. I just came from a Senate meeting, and I'm trying to include more of the Indigenous teachings, because a lot of the international students, the non-Indigenous students that I'm in class with right now, I'm in my Master's of Education, and I'm working on my portfolio on how to include the clan systems into the classrooms, which will create better relationships with students, with parents, with teachers, with everybody. Because that's what's missing right now, is the socialization. A lot of students, I'm noticing, and the teachers are having a very difficult time with this online learning. I find it's very unsociable I feel really sad for the students that are going through this, and the teachers as well, and the parents, because they're all frustrated. And so I'm thinking, like, for the parents and the teachers and the students to take back what you're talking about, Jeremiah, Charlene, and Lynette, and anybody that's talking about bringing back the socialization from this pandemic. It's been really difficult for myself because I'm a social butterfly, and I'm always like trying to revitalize the Indigenous language. And my my parents, they taught me, you know, to stand up for myself and for others, and not just because I'm talking about the circle, you know, the medicine wheel that is, because we're all included in this world, and we have to create a world that's inclusive of everybody, and to not let what you're talking about, Jeremiah, Lynette, and Charlene, about having and creating a safe space for everybody. And I'm finding it difficult because, like, normally I'm at the Lakehead University working with all the students, because like I volunteer on the Senate for Teaching and Learning Committee, and I'm also I just became the chief steward of QP 3905, whatever that means. I just like I wanted to help bring back humanity somehow. I don't know how. It just, I guess, through care, commitment, love, all the 7 grandfathers. And I just learned about one grandfather from an elder that's Ponchigate Darwin, is forgiveness. So we have to find that forgiveness within ourselves, because sometimes it's hard, because like when, you know, kids want to come up and, you know, they're so innocent and they're so wonderful, want to come up and hug you, and then you have to say, well, you know, social distancing, and it's just really difficult to have that. So what I'm teaching right now is to bring back the language of your identity, your clan. Everybody has a clan, and everybody comes from somewhere. So when I say I'm from Fort Wayne First Nation, Nimki Waju, Dunjiba, so Jeremiah, he was also saying he's from Six Nations. And anybody that's from a specific place, having identity brings a sense of belonging and a sense of uniqueness, what we're talking about, because we need to realize and to embrace the uniqueness of everybody, because we all bring special gifts. I think that's what you're talking about, Jeremiah, about special gifts. And Charlene, you're also talking about restoring the I think talking about residential school to young children. They already hear about it, like it. They hear about it through social media, and so they're kind of curious about it. So I think it's important to like, because like certain like they should know certain things, like just to keep them innocent, you know what I mean, like not to overwhelm them with all the other stuff that, you know, is like really shocking, because we have to tell them the truth, but in a way that is not gonna like traumatize them, you know what I mean, like they need to know that it happened, and they need to know oh, this is, and let kids be kids, play, like let the way look.
That's I love, Beverly, how you offered a really great example of the importance of this topic in higher education institutions. So even within the university, how education is from early childhood education to lifelong learning. It's a continuum. We learn throughout our whole life, and there's impact of in education programs at the university, how that basically trains teachers with younger. So they're all interconnected. And kudos to you for the work that you're trying to do at Lakehead University. It's a really great example of showcasing how in every educational setting this conversation needs to be had, right? So I don't know if Charlene, you want to hear, there's but I might throw, there's a few. Estelle has her hand up, and so Charlene, I'll let you quickly respond, and then I think I'll give a chance to a few other questions. Thanks, Beverly.
Thank you for listening.
That was really powerful. I loved your sharing. I just wanted to let you know that, because as soon as you said about, the students, the teachers, the parents, and you talked about the clans, and I think that is a really great way to do that, so that in the clans, people think about doing these groupings in school, in class, but they don't have multiple generations in there. And so there's an organization in Alberta that just started in the fall, and it's 2 young First Nation women. It's called Roots of Resilience Education Foundation. And they're actually working with Alberta School Councils Association to try to bring that in through the parents as well, and have the school councils that have parents on them, because that's the generation that's missed, right? I mean, the average 9-year-old in this country knows more about reconciliation, and our collective history than the average 50-year-old. So just a thought about that. They're actually doing that work to try to bring the parents into that fold as well. So I just wanted to share that. Okay.
Thank you. And even during the pandemic, I've had such great examples of UNESCO schools working intergenerationally with even seniors' homes. In New Brunswick, there was a great example of a quilt that was being, every student was doing a square, and the elders were also doing. So like, I think even we have to think beyond physical, and we hope soon that we'll be able to have our elders with us physically. But even if we can't, I think we can use a lot of online learning tools as well to bring them into the classroom. Estelle, you have your hand up, and I know that Linda also asked a question in the chat.
Thank you so much. Before this event started, I was, tired. Well, now all you've done is inspire me, and now I feel as if I have to run out the door and start working like crazy. But the question for me is that currently we're building a series of ethics events, And we're trying to reach from cradle to grave. And the challenge, like I think, Charlene, you mentioned about, we do sort of a lot of area work in the area of high school, university, and the challenge and the demand from teachers and even from superintendents and school divisions is the lower grades. And I was hoping that some of you would have resources, or even for the primary and middle year students, about what we can provide. Like we do ethics slams, ethic cafes, we do the high school ethics bowl, which is now almost across Canada. But I really would appreciate, because your comments really hit home about global citizenship starts at a very, very early age. So that's my question. Please, if you have insights, I will gladly listen to every word and try to jot down as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Great. So resources, well, I invite you also to use the chat. So I'll make sure I'll put that Roots of Resilience as an example. I'm going to throw out the next question as well, but hopefully then we can go do a full circle if there's practical, like what Estelle is asking, like practical tools and examples and ways, if people want to, offer that. And as well, just as I said, use the chat function, and we'll try to share that maybe by email after, or online on social media, so everyone can have it, even if you're joining live on Facebook. A question from Linda, which is actually for Lynette. So do you think global citizenship has gained steam in the world? And if not, what can we do to ensure its vision is maintained in the education system? So looking at the continuum of where we see this concept of global citizenship education, has it increased in popularity or less or more?
I think both of those things. So it is certainly found in education work globally now. And if you look, and that is really because UNESCO has taken the task of disseminating information and also supporting research and resource development really throughout the world. And so if you look at South Korea, as Charlene was saying, is really playing a leadership role in the world. And so they have developed amazing materials that I would encourage everyone to have a look at. And so I do think that the idea is being I guess spreading. Now the caution to that is that as if you've been working with the idea of global citizenship for very long, it can kind of be co-opted and taken into places that are not very helpful. A kind of idea that there's a citizen that lives outside the planet, really out there, that global is somewhere out there, not connected to a place. And so, I really love the work that ASPNet Schools and CC UNESCO have done, in particular in ensuring that this notion of global citizenship really is a connection to where you are, but understanding how where you are is connected to all the other places. Bruno Latour said, there's no such thing as global. It's just a collection of all the locals. And our challenge is to ensure that we see that there are all these views and experiences and positions in the world. So I think that kind of global citizenship, we need to continually work to keep the idea of global citizenship in that. It's not just for an elite to be galloping through the world.
Thank you. We are coming to the end of this wonderful panel. So I want to give maybe a 1 minute to all of our panelists for last words of wisdom, inspiration, or even, as Estelle mentioned, like any resources or particular things that we should be thinking about as we're going to be leaving. So I'll give I'll hand it over first to Jeremiah. So just wanted to hear, again, just 1 minute each for our last panelist for last words. Closing remarks, if you want to be official.
Thank you. Well, I guess like first of all, resource. One aspect of kind of like changing things up in the classroom was like that I was introduced to was like kind of like mindfulness practices and kind of incorporating like meditation into classrooms, like even at a like I've talked to people who like even at like a young age, or university students, or even like workplaces. Because I think like the idea of like active listening, being very present in the space, and then with mindfulness, you could also connect to like being connected with each other and with nature. I think it definitely creates a different kind of classroom dynamic where people are like very like actively listening. But like a great resource, here's a book. It's called Happy Teachers Change the World by Thich Nhat Hanh and Catherine Weir. I'll write it down in the chat too, but it's a resource for teachers to learn mindfulness, and then also has instructions how to teach mindfulness to like kids or students, and to kind of like create that aspect or bring that into your community, learning community too. But like overall, thank you so much for having me. It was a really exciting discussion, really energizes. Thank you, everyone. It was really great to be here.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. That was great. That was actually, Lynette and Charlene were just finishing up. I don't know if there's any last words you want to share.
I just want to answer Estelle's question, if that's okay. And
Yeah.
that is that, and maybe somebody can find it and put it in the chat quickly, but Martin Family Initiative actually has a website that's called Promising Practices website. They call it PPW. And they every week add more and more resources there at all different levels. And so if you wanted to take a look at that, that would be fantastic. Carlana Lindemann from the Martin Family Initiative would also be able to help you out with that. But that one has lots of resources that are all different age levels. And with that, Ishnish Pinamat, and thank you so much, Jeremiah, for bringing the youth perspective to this, Ishnish.
Thank you, Lynette.
Just thank you so much for bringing people together. This is where global citizenship education happens. So thanks so much.
And thank you all for all of you joining us online. I know we are going through Zoom fatigue, so I'm always, so grateful when people connect and log online to have these conversations. I know it's hard during these days to do your meetings and everything. So thank you so much. I've taken notes from the resources. We'll make sure to share with the organizers and make sure that we have some of these resources to be shared as well to the larger symposium participants and delegates. And miigwech, merci. Thank you.